In October of 1942, high above the rugged terrain of Tunisia, a squadron of American P-38 Lightnings was diligently escorting B-17 bombers at an impressive altitude of 25,000 feet. Suddenly, without warning, a menacing formation of German Bf-109gs descended from the blinding glare of the sun, initiating a fierce aerial engagement. The American aviators instinctively pushed their throttles to their maximum forward positions, attempting to gain precious altitude to counter the imminent threat. The twin Allison V-17-10 engines of their aircraft roared in protest, yet an alarming anomaly was becoming painfully apparent. The P-38s struggled to ascend, their climb rate alarmingly sluggish, as if they were inexplicably tethered to the ground by invisible anchors. In stark contrast, the agile Messerschmitts ascended with astonishing alacrity, seemingly defying gravity as they gained altitude with the effortless grace of homesick angels, swiftly positioning themselves for a subsequent, devastating attack. By the time the American Lightnings had managed to claw their way up an additional 2,000 feet, the German 109s had already achieved a staggering 4,000-foot advantage. This was not a fair contest of aerial prowess. It was an impending catastrophe, an execution waiting to unfold in the unforgiving skies. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. This disconcerting scenario was far from an isolated incident. Throughout the latter half of 1942 and extending into early 1943, P-38 pilots operating across various theaters, from the sun-baked expanses of North Africa to the frostbitten skies of Europe, consistently lodged identical complaints. The P-38 Lightning had been heralded as America's ultimate aerial weapon, engineered to decisively counter any challenge the Axis powers might present. Its design boasted redundant twin engines, formidable armament, and impressive speed in level flight, projecting an image of invincibility on paper. However, in the crucible of actual combat, particularly above 20,000 feet, the aircraft's performance was disturbingly compromised, likened by pilots to flying an aircraft suffering from severe emphysema. Aviators reported a frustratingly sluggish throttle response, a lamentably poor rate of climb, and engines that seemed to gasp desperately for air. In the frantic, high-stakes environment of a dogfight, where superior altitude often dictated the very thin line between survival and demise, such deficiencies amounted to an unequivocal death sentence. The Army Air Forces were acutely aware of the burgeoning crisis. Intelligence reports unequivocally confirmed that the latest iterations of German fighter aircraft, specifically the formidable Bf-109G and the agile FW-190A, were consistently outclimbing their American counterparts at the critical altitudes required for effective bomber escort operations. Consequently, the P-38 was hemorrhaging skilled pilots and suffering humiliating defeats in engagements it was theoretically designed to dominate. Engineers situated at Lockheed's Burbank facility were certainly cognizant of the persistent complaints, yet the Lightning had successfully navigated all its rigorous acceptance trials. The fundamental design was considered robust, the sophisticated superchargers appeared to be functioning precisely as intended, and any significant structural or mechanical modifications would inevitably entail months of bureaucratic hurdles and implementation delays through official channels. In the interim, precious lives were being tragically forfeited. What remained universally unrecognized at this critical juncture was that the definitive solution would not originate from Lockheed's prestigious engineering department, nor from the advanced testing facilities at Wright Field. It would not emerge from meticulous wind tunnel data or sophisticated computational analysis. Instead, the pivotal answer would be discovered by an unassuming individual, a man whose hands were perpetually stained with grease. someone willing to disregard the dictates of official manuals and, instead, place his trust in the subtle, yet urgent, language the engine itself was attempting to convey. In the unforgiving crucible of wartime, sheer desperation possesses an uncanny ability to transform mundane wrenches into instruments of tactical advantage. And, quite remarkably, some of the most profound innovations frequently originate from individuals who are blissfully unaware that they are theoretically destined for failure. The P-38's critical high-altitude performance deficit was on the verge of encountering a determined mechanic who simply refused to acknowledge the concept of impossibility. His name, regrettably, has been irrevocably lost to the comfortable anonymity that so often envelopes the vast majority of enlisted personnel. Nevertheless, his fellow squadron mates in North Africa knew him intimately as the extraordinary individual who possessed the uncanny knack for coaxing a perfectly healthy purr from even the most ailing engine. He was a staff sergeant, estimated to be around 30 years of age, and assigned to a P-38 squadron that had been mercilessly decimated over the hostile skies of Tunisia in the early months of 1943. Prior to the outbreak of the war, he had honed his practical skills in various automotive repair shops, establishments where one invariably learned the crucial art of making do with whatever limited resources were at hand, primarily because the average customer simply could not afford the luxury of brand-new replacement parts. That ingrained, Depression-era "make it work" ethos was eminently poised to fundamentally alter the very trajectory of aerial warfare. The diligent mechanic spent his arduous days immersed elbow-deep in the intricate mechanics of Allison V1710 engines, and through this constant interaction, he began to discern a recurring, troubling pattern. Pilots would consistently return from their high-altitude missions, recounting tales of significant power loss occurring above 22,000 feet. He would then meticulously run the engines on the ground, carefully scrutinize the supercharger boost pressures, and thoroughly examine the intercoolers, every single component consistently checked out within the established specifications. However, the mechanic astutely realized that these specifications had been meticulously drafted for sea-level conditions in the temperate climate of Burbank, California, a stark contrast to the brutal realities of combat operations in the scorching North African heat, where ambient temperatures on the tarmac could soar to a blistering 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Driven by a profound sense of urgency, keenly aware that his comrades were perishing, he began to study the P-38's complex induction system with an intensity bordering on obsession. The Lightning incorporated a turbo-supercharger system that was, by all engineering accounts, genuinely brilliant. Exhaust gases were ingeniously harnessed to spin a turbine, which in turn compressed the incoming air, thereby forcing a greater volume of oxygen into the engine cylinders at higher altitudes. That compressed air, however, became exceedingly hot, necessitating its passage through intercoolers before it could enter the engine. These intercoolers were theoretically designed to significantly reduce the temperature of the compressed air by routing it through specialized chambers where cooler ambient air flowed around the pipes. In principle, the design was elegantly conceived and theoretically flawless. Yet, in the relentlessly scorching North African theater, those intercoolers were attempting the arduous task of cooling 300 degrees compressed air with ambient air that already registered as sweltering 100 degrees. The critical temperature differential was simply insufficient to achieve the desired cooling effect. Consequently, the air entering the cylinders remained excessively hot, which drastically reduced its density and, in turn, effectively strangled the engine's power output. However, here lay the profound insight that the diligent mechanic alone had gleaned, a crucial detail that had eluded everyone else. The intercooler ducting was equipped with adjustable exit doors, ingeniously controlled by a thermostatic valve. The entire system had been meticulously designed to maintain a precise temperature range, but this range had been calibrated for moderate environmental conditions. In the extreme demands of combat, pilots desperately required maximum cooling, not a carefully balanced thermostatic equilibrium. A crucial question began to formulate in his mind. What if one were to bypass the thermostatic control entirely and manually force those intercooler exit doors wide open? What if one simply flooded the intercooler chambers with the absolute maximum amount of cooling air that the laws of physics would permit? To hell with the meticulous calibration. The official engineering manual explicitly stated, "Don't touch it." The technical orders were unequivocally clear about maintaining factory settings, but this resourceful mechanic possessed a different, more urgent manual, one implicitly written by the pilots, who consistently returned with bullet-riddled aircraft and harrowing accounts of German adversaries who could effortlessly outline them. Occasionally, the most brilliant feats of engineering materialize when one ceases to seek formal permission. The thermostatic valve, it became clear, was the insidious bottleneck that no one in the official channels was willing to acknowledge. Lockheed's engineers had incorporated it with the noble intention of safeguarding the engines from thermal shock, operating under the premise that abrupt and drastic temperature fluctuations could potentially crack cylinder heads or warp critical components. Thus, the valve precisely modulated intercooler airflow to maintain temperatures within a safe, predictable, and conservative range. This was conservative engineering, the kind designed to appease legal departments and minimize warranty claims. The mechanic, however, perceived it from an entirely different perspective. These engines were not succumbing to thermal shock. They were failing to generate adequate power precisely when pilots needed it most, and, tragically, men were losing their lives as a direct consequence of this overly cautious engineering. He commandeered a P-38 that was undergoing routine maintenance and immediately set to work. The intercooler exit doors were spring-loaded, meticulously controlled by that aforementioned thermostatic valve, which diligently sensed temperature and adjusted accordingly. He completely bypassed the entire system, locking the exit doors in their fully open position, thereby ensuring that the maximum possible volume of air would continuously flow through the intercooler cores at all times. Then, he undertook another modification that would undoubtedly make any conventional engineer wince. The intercooler ducts contained restrictive baffles internally, which were designed to ensure an even distribution of air across the cooling surfaces. He systematically removed some of these baffles, effectively widening the airflow path. More air, less restriction, maximum cooling. It was the mechanical equivalent of removing the governor from an engine. Crude, potentially perilous, yet precisely what the dire situation unequivocally demanded. The pivotal test flight occurred on a crisp February morning in 1943. The pilot entrusted with this critical mission was a lieutenant who had already survived being shot down twice and, consequently, felt he had nothing left to lose. He expertly took the modified Lightning aloft, and at 5,000 feet, the engine temperatures registered as perfectly normal. At 10,000 feet, they remained exceptionally good. At 15,000 feet, the altitude where problems typically began to manifest, the cylinder head temperatures were running a remarkable 20 degrees cooler than those of standard P-38s. At 20,000 feet, where most Lightnings conventionally began to wheeze and struggle, this particular aircraft was still exhibiting strong manifold pressure. The pilot confidently pushed it to 25,000, then to an astonishing 28,000 feet. The engines were singing with a harmonious power, and he radioed down, exclaiming that the climb rate felt as if he had bolted on additional, invisible horses. The aircraft was achieving altitude significantly faster than anything he had ever piloted before. Upon his landing, a substantial crowd had gathered, eagerly awaiting his return. Word of the extraordinary experiment had rapidly disseminated throughout the maintenance crews. The pilot emerged from the cockpit, a wide grin spreading across his face, and uttered 6 succinct words that irrevocably altered everything. "She climbs like a homesick angel." The vigilant mechanic immediately checked the spark plugs, meticulously examined the cylinder compressions, and scrupulously searched for any discernible signs of thermal damage. There was absolutely none. The engines were operating with optimal efficiency and contentment. Cooler intake temperatures equated to denser air. Denser air, in turn, meant a greater volume of oxygen per cylinder firing. More oxygen directly translated to a substantial increase in power. It was a fundamental principle of thermodynamics, the kind of concept that could be readily explained to a high school physics class. Yet, it had taken a pragmatic mechanic, willing to disregard the rigid confines of the manual, to actually implement this vital principle in the harsh realities of the field. Within a mere week, every single P-38 within that squadron was receiving the revolutionary modification during its routine maintenance schedule. Pilots soon began specifically requesting aircraft by their tail numbers, explicitly asking for the hot rods, equipped with the newly modified intercoolers. The squadron commander found himself confronted with a momentous decision, one that was far from straightforward. On one hand, he was overseeing field modifications that were occurring entirely outside official channels, a type of action that could potentially terminate careers if anything were to go catastrophically wrong. On the other hand, he possessed undeniable combat reports demonstrating that his modified P-38s were suddenly intensely competitive at altitudes where, just 2 weeks prior, they had been nothing more than vulnerable sitting ducks. He was a lieutenant colonel who had valiantly flown combat missions in the First World War, and he possessed a profound understanding of a crucial truth that peacetime bureaucrats frequently overlooked. In the brutal reality of war, the most effective solution is invariably the one that works immediately, not the theoretically perfect one that arrives a disheartening 6 months too late. A truly inspired solution, born of immediate necessity rather than protracted deliberation, had arrived, not months, but moments before the crisis reached its critical zenith. The ingenious mechanic, whose identity remains unsung in the annals of official reports, meticulously documented his innovative adjustment and dispatched a comprehensive report detailing both the methodology and the impressive performance enhancements to the 5th Air Force headquarters. The subsequent communication from the command staff was a study in bureaucratic caution, tinged with a reluctant recognition of potential merit. It advocated for the continuation of rigorous testing, emphasized the imperative of thorough documentation, but firmly stipulated against any widespread fleet implementation without the prerequisite, exhaustive engineering review. In essence, the official pronouncement was a deferral, a polite, perhaps at a later, unspecified date. Yet, the true narrative unfolded not through official channels, but through the clandestine network of necessity and shared combat experience. The unofficial consensus, the one that genuinely propelled change, manifested as field commanders, cognizant of the tangible benefits, began to discreetly authorize the modification for their respective squadrons. Word of this practical triumph spread, with the speed of wildfire among operational units. A discerning captain from an adjacent P-38 contingent, upon learning of the breakthrough, promptly dispatched his chief of maintenance to observe the procedure firsthand. This emissary returned with the vital knowledge, enabling the captain to promptly oversee the modification of his own squadron's aircraft. By the arrival of March 1943, the distinctive silhouette of modified Lightnings became an increasingly common sight across the North African theater, and the seasoned pilots of the Luftwaffe, with their keen observational skills, began to discern a palpable shift in the aerial dynamics. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away at Wright Field in Ohio, the Army Air Force's dedicated engineers were diligently endeavoring to address the identical performance challenges through the established, official protocols. They had, indeed, received numerous complaints concerning the P-38s' high-altitude performance deficiencies, and had initiated a meticulously structured testing regimen. This encompassed a broad spectrum of scientific inquiry, intricate wind tunnel analyses, comprehensive temperature mapping studies, and sophisticated computational assessments of airflow dynamics within the intercooler ducts. It was a commendable display of rigorous scientific methodology and proper engineering practice, yet it proceeded at the inherently deliberate pace characteristic of peacetime engineering review. Their preliminary findings, formally released in April 1943, cautiously suggested that the efficiency of the intercooler system could be markedly enhanced through a redesign of the existing ducting and a recalibration of the thermostatic valve. The projected timeline for implementation was estimated at a substantial 8 to 12 months, necessitating the fabrication of specialized modification kits at the Lockheed facilities and their subsequent distribution through a complex network of depot-level maintenance centers. In stark contrast, the mechanics' pragmatic solution was already fully operational on dozens of aircraft, having been accomplished in approximately 4 hours per plane utilizing only standard tools. It required no specialized components, no factory support, and no elaborate engineering drawings, merely an intuitive, hands-on comprehension of the engine's fundamental requirements. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. This disparity inevitably engendered an acutely uncomfortable predicament, one that military bureaucracies, with their inherent preference for order and predictability, inherently abhorred. Irrefutable evidence that official, protracted processes were being dramatically outpaced by the ingenuity of individuals armed with mere wrenches. A faction of engineering officers, adhering to established norms, vociferously expressed their concerns, citing the potential for unauthorized modifications to invalidate technical compliance certifications and to generate significant maintenance complications down the line. Their apprehension was not entirely unfounded. Standardization exists for a multitude of valid reasons, and ad hoc field modifications can indeed precipitate considerable logistical nightmares when attempting to sustain hundreds of aircraft across diverse operational theaters. However, the unforgiving crucible of combat possesses an unparalleled capacity for definitively resolving arguments that the nuanced debates of peacetime invariably fail to settle. By the late spring of 1943, a sufficient number of modified P-38s had successfully executed an impressive volume of missions, consistently yielding measurably superior results, to the point where the initial resistance from official channels began to unequivocally crumble. The accumulated data was simply irrefutable. Discernible climb rates had improved by a significant 12 to 15% at critical altitudes. Crucially, engine temperatures remained reliably within safe operating parameters, and not a single catastrophic engine failure attributable to the modification had been reported. The 8th Air Force, operating from its bases in England, began to actively solicit detailed information regarding this remarkably effective modification. The definitive proof of the modification's efficacy arrived in the form of mission reports that bordered on the fantastical. On the auspicious date of April 18, 1943, a flight of these newly modified P-38s, originating from the distinguished 1st Fighter Group, successfully intercepted a formation of German Ju-88 bombers over the azure expanse of the Mediterranean at a challenging altitude of 26,000 feet. The Lightning flight leader, with a keen eye, rapidly identified the enemy formation, issued the command to attack, and his pilots, with a newfound agility, ascended an additional 3,000 feet in less than 2 minutes to attain an optimal position for a decisive diving pass. The German aircrews, accustomed to the P-38's characteristic struggles at such high altitudes, harbored no expectation that the American fighters could achieve an attack posture with such breathtaking alacrity. Consequently, 3 Ju-88s were decisively shot down in a blaze of glory before their escorting fighters could even mount a meaningful reaction. The subsequent after-action report specifically highlighted, "Aircraft exhibited superior climb performance. Modification appears effective in combat conditions," a testament to its undeniable impact. Over the rugged terrain of Tunisia, in May 1943, modified P-38s from the valiant 82nd Fighter Group engaged in a fierce aerial ballet with formidable Bf-109gs at an arduous altitude of 28,000 feet. During this intense engagement, an American pilot, a courageous first lieutenant hailing from the state of Michigan, found himself embroiled in a climbing scissors maneuver with a renowned German ace. In the days of the unmodified P-38s, such an engagement would have been tantamount to suicide. The agile Bf-109 would have effortlessly outmaneuvered and decisively defeated the Lightning in a vertical dogfight. However, the modified Lightning, defying previous limitations, remained resolutely with the Messerschmitt, almost perfectly matching its every turn in the relentless climb. The German pilot, undoubtedly bewildered by the unexpected capabilities of his adversary, committed a critical tactical error, attempting to extend vertically. The P-38, with its enhanced performance, stayed precisely on his tail, and the lieutenant delivered a devastating 3-second burst into the 109's engine. The Messerschmitt disintegrated spectacularly at an astonishing 31,000 feet. The gun camera footage of this remarkable encounter quickly circulated through every fighter squadron in the theater, serving as irrefutable evidence of the modification's potency. The accumulating statistics began to make the remaining skeptics increasingly uncomfortable. Between the months of March and June 1943, squadrons operating the modified P-38s reported a remarkable 42% reduction in losses during high-altitude bomber escort missions, when compared to the preceding 3-month interval. Pilots were now able to engage enemy aircraft and disengage from combat on their own terms. Rather than being compelled into defensive engagements, they were ill-equipped to win. The enhanced Lightnings were consistently achieving an operational altitude of 30,000 feet, 4 to 6 minutes faster than their stock counterparts. In the unforgiving arena of a dogfight, a 4-minute advantage is as significant as 4 hours. It fundamentally shifted the dynamic, transforming the American pilots from the hunted into the hunters. The Luftwaffe, ever vigilant, certainly took notice of these profound changes. German intelligence reports from mid-1943, meticulously recovered after the cessation of hostilities, explicitly mentioned that American P-38s were demonstrating significantly improved performance at altitude compared to previous encounters. One particular Luftwaffe pilot, interrogated after being shot down in June, confessed to his captors that he had initially believed he was battling P-47s due to the astonishing climb rate, and expressed genuine shock upon learning that his adversaries were, in fact, Lightnings. The psychological impact of this transformation was nearly as significant as the tangible tactical advantage. German pilots, who had grown accustomed to the predictable limitations of the P-38, were suddenly forced to acknowledge and respect it as a legitimate and formidable high-altitude threat. By the advent of summer 1943, the modification had acquired an unofficial moniker among the dedicated ground crews and airmen, the White Lightning Upgrade. This evocative name cleverly referenced both the P-38's distinctive natural metal finish and the potent, moonshine-like kick it imparted to the engines, signifying a dramatic boost in performance. Pilots who had experienced both configurations consistently described the difference as night and day. One particularly eloquent captain from the 14th Fighter Group, in an interview with a war correspondent, vividly articulated that flying a stock P-38 after having experienced the modification was akin to going back to driving a truck after you'd gotten used to a sports car, underscoring the profound improvement. Lockheed's highly skilled engineers at their Burbank facility finally managed to acquire a field-modified P-38 in June 1943. Their subsequent examination of the aircraft elicited a complex mixture of professional admiration and profound horror. Admiration, because the modification demonstrably functioned precisely as advertised, delivering the promised performance enhancements. Horror, because it flagrantly violated approximately 15 distinct design protocols and had been implemented with what one engineer rightly characterized as aggressive simplification. The bypassed thermostatic valve, the deliberately removed baffles, and the intercooler doors locked in an open position, all these deviations from established engineering principles understandably caused considerable unease among theoretical engineers. However, the empirical test data, meticulously collected, simply did not lie. Dynamometer runs unequivocally demonstrated a 12% increase in power output at 25,000 feet when compared to the standard configuration. Crucially, temperature margins consistently remained within acceptable limits, even under conditions of sustained high power settings. The company found itself confronting an uncomfortable truth. Their meticulously designed product was being significantly improved in the field by resourceful mechanics who had never once laid eyes on an engineering blueprint. Professional pride, undoubtedly, took a considerable hit. However, Lockheed's leadership deserves immense credit for their subsequent actions. They commendably swallowed that pride and immediately set to work. By July 1943, dedicated engineering teams were rigorously analyzing the precise mechanisms by which the field modification achieved its effectiveness and strategizing how to properly integrate it across the entire production line. They ultimately rediscovered what the intuitive mechanic had instinctively understood. The original intercooler system had been somewhat over-engineered, incorporating excessive safety margins that the harsh realities of combat operations simply did not necessitate. The thermostatic valve, designed to guard against theoretical problems, was inadvertently creating very real performance limitations in practice. The P-38J model, which commenced production in August 1943, proudly incorporated a thoroughly revised intercooler ducting system featuring significantly improved airflow and modified thermostatic controls designed to remain open for longer durations under high-power settings. While it was not an exact, verbatim replication of the field modification, Lockheed's engineers introduced various refinements and maintained superior quality control standards. Nevertheless, the fundamental core principle remained identical: to facilitate a greater volume of cooling air through those critical intercoolers, particularly at elevated altitudes. The J model also boasted enlarged intercooler cores, providing an impressive 25% increase in surface area, thereby further enhancing heat rejection capabilities. As a direct consequence, engine output at 25,000 feet dramatically surged by nearly 200 horsepower compared to the earlier models. The P-38L variant, which began its rollout from the production line in June 1944, pushed these advancements even further. Lockheed's engineers meticulously designed entirely new intercooler housings, incorporating highly streamlined internal ducting that effectively reduced restriction while simultaneously maximizing airflow. The exit doors were made larger, and the entire control system was comprehensively redesigned to prioritize optimal cooling efficiency over strict temperature stability. Combat pilots who transitioned from the early model Lightnings to the advanced L variant universally reported that it felt like an entirely different aircraft at altitude, a testament to its transformative capabilities. The rate of climb to 30,000 feet improved by nearly 30% compared to the original P-38F and G models, which had struggled so significantly in 1942. Herein lies the truly pivotal part of this remarkable narrative. When Lockheed engineers formally presented their significantly improved intercooler system to the Army Air Force's technical reviewers in late 1943, they unreservedly credited the field modifications for having illuminated the path forward. The official engineering reports, in a rare moment of institutional candor, explicitly acknowledged that the crucible of combat experience had unequivocally revealed inherent limitations in the original design that even the most rigorous factory testing had failed to detect. It was a profound and genuinely rare instance of institutional humility, a public admission that resourceful mechanics operating in the challenging environment of North Africa had effectively solved a critical problem that the most brilliant engineers at Lockheed's Burbank facility had, regrettably, overlooked. The superior judgment of the most accomplished engineers at Lockheed had, astonishingly, overlooked a critical design flaw. By the close of 1944, a substantial fleet of over 4,000 P-38 Lightnings had been manufactured, each incorporating significantly enhanced intercooler systems. The genesis of these crucial improvements lay directly with the steadfast refusal of a single, unheralded mechanic to blindly adhere to the dictates of the official maintenance manual. The widespread tactical ramifications of this ingenuity reverberated across every operational zone where the P-38 was deployed, fundamentally reshaping the strategic deployment of the Lightning in active combat. Prior to this pivotal modification, established military doctrine regarded P-38s primarily as medium-altitude interceptors, best suited for engagements below the 20,000-foot ceiling, an altitude where their inherent capabilities remain competitively viable. Following the implementation of this vital upgrade, squadron commanders began confidently assigning Lightnings to demanding high-altitude escort missions, a role that had previously been the exclusive domain of the more heavily armored P-47 Thunderbolts. A compelling illustration of this newfound capability emerged in August 1943, when a contingent of modified P-38s from the distinguished 55th Fighter Group provided top cover for B-17 flying fortresses targeting Regensburg at a daunting altitude of 30,000 feet. Such an audacious mission profile would have been deemed an act of sheer recklessness, bordering on suicidal, merely half a year earlier. The most profoundly dramatic affirmation of the modification's efficacy unfolded during the subsequent phases of Operation Torch in North Africa, spanning the spring and summer months of 1943. On May 7, Captain John Weltman, a skilled pilot attached to the 27th Fighter Squadron, piloted a modified P-38 while escorting bombers en route to Tunis. His flight element soon encountered a formidable formation of a dozen Bf-109gs at 27,000 feet, their pilots clearly intent on executing a swift, destructive dive through the bomber formation. Captain Weltman's element responded with remarkable alacrity, executing an aggressive climb to intercept, ultimately reaching an astonishing 32,000 feet. This maneuver effectively compelled the German fighters to engage at an altitude where the newly optimized Lightnings now possessed a distinct and decisive advantage. His flight successfully claimed 3 confirmed aerial victories, all while ensuring the complete safety of the escorted bombers. His subsequent after-action report contained a succinct yet profoundly impactful observation that rapidly circulated through every fighter group in the theater. Aircraft perform beyond expectations at altitude. Modification is combat critical. Across the European skies, this narrative of transformative performance was consistently reiterated, albeit with minor operational variations, yet invariably leading to the same resounding conclusion. Major Thomas Lynch, an accomplished ace serving with the 39th Fighter Squadron in the vast Pacific Theater, recounted a harrowing engagement with Japanese P-43 Oscars at 28,000 feet above New Guinea in July 1943. The Oscars, renowned for their exceptional nimbleness, typically relied heavily on their superior climb rate to dictate the terms and altitude of any aerial confrontation. However, Major Lynch's modified P-38, demonstrating its enhanced capabilities, ascended directly through the Japanese formation, effectively disrupting their tactical cohesion and scattering their aircraft. This disarray allowed his vigilant wingmen to systematically target and eliminate the now isolated enemy planes. That evening, Major Lynch meticulously recorded in his personal diary a sentiment that captured the essence of their newfound dominance. "The Lightning finally does what it was always supposed to do. We own the sky up here now." We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Comprehensive statistical analyses from the latter half of 1943 unequivocally demonstrated this profound transformation in quantifiable metrics. Fighter groups operating the upgraded P-38s reported an astonishing 57% surge in the destruction of enemy aircraft during high-altitude engagements, a stark contrast to the identical unit's performance recorded in late 1942 and the initial months of 1943. Even more critically, the rates of bomber losses on missions expertly escorted by these improved P-38s plummeted by a significant 31%. This dramatic reduction directly translated into the preservation of hundreds of invaluable aircrew lives. These remarkable achievements not only encompassed the saving of countless lives, but also safeguarded billions of dollars worth of vital aircraft and precious munitions, ensuring they successfully reached their intended targets rather than tragically plummeting from the sky over occupied Europe. Beyond the tangible assets, the modification profoundly altered the psychological disposition of the pilots themselves. Interviews conducted with P-38 pilots in 1942 frequently revealed palpable frustration and persistent complaints regarding their perceived disadvantage in aerial combat. Conversely, interviews conducted from late 1943 onward exuded an unmistakable aura of profound confidence and aggressive resolve. Lieutenant William McGuire, a seasoned pilot serving with the 71st Fighter Squadron, articulately expressed this paradigm shift to a visiting reporter in October 1943. He remarked, "6 months ago, I'd see Germans above me and think, 'Here we go again.' Now I see them and think, 'You're already dead. You just don't know it yet.'" This striking declaration perfectly encapsulates the strategic advantage afforded by an additional 3,000 feet of climb rate, the invaluable luxury of dictating the terms and choosing the optimal conditions for aerial engagements. The narrative of this anonymous mechanic, unfortunately, concludes much like the stories of countless other enlisted personnel, shrouded in obscurity, devoid of official medals or public recognition. He was rotated back to the continental United States sometime in late 1943, presumably returning to his previous civilian profession of repairing automobiles in whatever hometown he had departed from, his name never finding its way into the annals of military history. The Army Air Forces, adhering to strict protocols, did not bestow Distinguished Service Medals for unauthorized field modifications, irrespective of the sheer number of lives such ingenuity ultimately preserved. His indelible contribution persists, subtly embedded within scattered maintenance logs, briefly alluded to in after-action reports that acknowledge enhanced performance without ever explicitly naming the source, and most profoundly, in the continued survival of pilots who safely returned home because their engines steadfastly performed at 28,000 feet, refusing to falter. Nevertheless, his profound influence is unmistakably woven throughout the fabric of aviation history, discernible to those who possess the insight to seek it. The P-38's remarkable metamorphosis from a significant altitude liability to a formidable high-altitude predator irrevocably transformed American fighter tactics for the duration of the war. It powerfully validated the revolutionary concept that practical field experience could, at times, surpass the rigid dictates of established engineering orthodoxy, a crucial lesson that military services would repeatedly absorb, regrettably forget, and then relearn through the crucible of conflicts spanning Korea, Vietnam, and every subsequent engagement. When Lockheed embarked on the ambitious design of the P-80 Shooting Star, America's pioneering operational jet fighter, the meticulous intercooler specifications explicitly incorporated provisions for maximizing airflow under the most demanding combat conditions. These were not theoretical postulates, but hard-won insights directly derived from the practical experiences of a mechanic who had never once set foot inside the sophisticated Burbank wind tunnel. The broader, more enduring lesson emanating from this episode transcended the confines of a single aircraft or a solitary modification. While engineers, meticulously working from extensive test data and intricate theoretical models, are capable of conceiving and producing truly magnificent machines, these sophisticated creations are ultimately destined to operate within the unforgiving parameters of real-world conditions that conventional testing often fails to fully replicate. Such conditions include the searing heat of North Africa, the immense psychological strain of combat stress, and the sustained high-power operations required at extreme altitudes. The original design of the P-38 had, inherently, been unable to account for the full spectrum of these variables, for no peacetime test program, however exhaustive, can accurately simulate the utter chaos and unpredictable exigencies of actual warfare. This is precisely where the invaluable contributions of mechanics, pilots, and line crew chiefs become indispensable, as they tirelessly strive to bridge the critical chasm between what the official manual prescribes and what demonstrably functions effectively when lives hang in the balance and adversaries are actively engaging. Modern aviation engineering has, to a significant extent, formalized and institutionalized many of the profound lessons imparted by that resourceful mechanic. Contemporary field modification programs now operate within officially sanctioned channels, thereby facilitating the rapid implementation of combat-proven enhancements. The United States Air Force, for instance, maintains entire specialized organizations specifically dedicated to the systematic harvesting of innovative ideas originating from operational units, and subsequently fast-tracking these improvements through accelerated development cycles. Yet, even in today's highly structured environment, the most groundbreaking innovations frequently commence in the same unassuming manner, with an individual intimately familiar with the hardware, who discerns something overlooked by everyone else, and possesses the courageous resolve to experiment with a solution not yet documented in any official publication. The P-38 Lightning concluded its distinguished wartime service with an exemplary combat record, over 10,000 units constructed, piloted by America's two most celebrated aces, instrumental in the pivotal downing of Admiral Yamamoto, and ultimately commanding the grudging respect of enemies who had initially dismissed its capabilities. This enduring legacy owes a significant debt to Kelly Johnson's brilliant original design, a substantial contribution from the skilled Allison engineers who crafted its robust power plants, and the unwavering courage of thousands of pilots who valiantly fought in its cockpit. However, it also owes an inestimable debt to a nameless staff sergeant who, observing an engine that was clearly underperforming, resolutely concluded that the manual's pronouncements were not, in fact, the ultimate authority. Occasionally, the most profoundly impactful innovations do not originate from the apex of organizational hierarchies. Rather, they ascend from the operational grassroots, conceived in greased pencil sketches and rigorously proven in the crucible of combat. That unheralded mechanic never fully comprehended the sheer number of lives his ingenious work ultimately preserved, nor the profound extent to which his simple yet revolutionary idea would ripple throughout the entirety of aviation history. Nevertheless, every single P-38 pilot who safely returned home from a mission at 30,000 feet understood implicitly. And that, truly, is the only form of recognition that genuinely matters.